The cold metal floor pressed against her skin, and the silence of the prison cell wrapped around her like a heavy cloak. She sat in the corner, her silver eyes fixed on the dim light above, a light that flickered as if mocking her fear. Her hands, bound by glowing restraints, trembled not from weakness but from the weight of certainty. She was going to die. She was an alien warrior, trained since childhood to hate humans, to fear them, and to believe they would never show mercy. And now, after the brutal battle where her squad had fallen, she had been dragged into their worship. Her people had always told stories of how humans would kill without question, how they delighted in the destruction of others. She thought she knew what awaited her: execution, torture, or worse. Death was no stranger to her mind, but waiting for it, hour after hour, was worse than the death itself. The door of the cell hissed open, and the sound made her heart race. She looked up sharply, expecting soldiers with weapons raised, but only one figure entered. A human officer, tall, silent, and carrying a tray of food. He placed it on the floor without a word, his eyes unreadable. Then he stepped back and left, the door sealing shut with a cold hiss. She stared at the tray, confused, her chest tight with suspicion. Food? Why food? Why water? Why let her live? It had to be a trick, she thought. Perhaps they wanted to keep her strong for interrogation, or maybe to study her body before the execution. Hours stretched into another day, and the visits repeated. Every time, it was the same. The officer entered, set down food and water, then left without a word. He never looked at her with cruelty, never raised his hand to strike her, never spoke. This silence was unbearable. It felt like a game, a slow death of the mind rather than the body. She would rather face the blade or the plasma fire than sit in the dark, waiting for something unknown. On the third visit, she broke her own silence. Why? Her voice cracked in the empty room. Why not kill me? The officer stopped, his back to her, his hand still holding the tray. For a long moment, she thought he would ignore her, but then he placed the food down and turned slightly. His eyes, a strange shade of deep brown, met hers for the first time. There was no hate there, only something else, something she could not understand. But he said nothing, and then he left. Her heart pounded harder than in battle, because silence from an enemy was far more terrifying than open rage. The days continued, and with them, her confusion grew. The stories of her people screamed in her mind. Humans will kill you. Humans are monsters. Humans are cruel. Yet here she was alive, breathing, and being fed by one of them. Every nerve told her it was wrong. Every thought told her not to trust. Still, a seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not crush it. The cell became her battlefield, her mind the weapon, and her enemy not the humans outside, but the questions inside her. Why keep her alive? Why show small kindness instead of cruelty? What were they waiting for? Every sound of the ship shook her nerves. The hum of engines, the distant steps of soldiers, the muffled orders given in a language she was just beginning to understand. Each sound was a reminder that she was surrounded, trapped in the heart of the enemy. Yet her death did not come. One night, if time even mattered in the darkness, she dreamed of the battlefield. She saw her squad, her friends, their faces frozen in fear as the humans closed in. She woke with a start, gasping, expecting the officer to be there watching, but the cell was empty. Her chest burned with anger, anger at him, anger at herself, anger at this confusion. She slammed her bound fists against the floor, the sound echoing like a scream. "I am not afraid," she whispered to the shadows, but her trembling voice betrayed the lie. The door hissed again, and she lifted her head. The officer stood there, his face unreadable as always. But this time, as he placed the tray down, he spoke one word, low and firm. "Eat." Her eyes widened, not because of the command, but because of the sound of his voice. It was not cruel, it was not mocking, it was steady, and in that single word, she heard something she had never expected: control, patience, and perhaps a strange form of care. She did not know then that her fate had already changed. She did not know that the death she had expected would never come. And she did not know that the human she feared would soon become the reason she lived. The cell became her world, a narrow space of shadows and silence. But within it, the human officer's visits were the only signs of life. He always came at the same time, with the same calm steps, carrying food and water, placing them down, and leaving without speaking. For her, each visit was torture, not because of pain, but because of the mystery. Why did he not kill her? Why did he not question her? Why did he treat her like a prisoner who mattered? She watched him every time he entered, studying the way his eyes moved, sharp and observant, but never cruel. He carried himself with quiet strength, like a soldier who had seen too much war and no longer needed to show power through violence. The silence between them was like a battlefield where no weapon was raised, yet the tension could cut through steel. She tried to ignore the food, try to prove she was not weak, but hunger gnawed at her stomach until her pride collapsed. Each bite of human food tasted bitter, not because of the flavor, but because of the shame she felt. Every swallow reminded her that she was alive only because they allowed it. And yet, her body grew stronger again, and with strength came more questions. At night, when the hum of the engines filled the silence, she thought of her people. Did they believe she was dead already? Did they mourn her? Or did they think she had betrayed them? The fear of her own kind's judgment twisted in her chest, even more than the fear of the humans. On the seventh day, the officer stayed longer. He did not leave after placing the tray. Instead, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes locked on her. His presence filled the small room with a strange weight. She sat upright, refusing to show fear, though her heart pounded like war drums. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice steady though her throat was dry. For the first time he answered, his voice deep, quiet but firm. "To see if you are strong," he said. Her eyes narrowed, confusion mixing with suspicion. "Strong for what? To fight? To die?" she asked. He tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Strong enough to survive," he replied, and then he walked out, leaving her drowning in questions. His words echoed in her mind like a riddle she could not solve. Survive what? Did he mean survive their judgment? Survive captivity? Or something else entirely? The more she thought, the more the stories of her people clashed with the reality before her. Her leaders had painted humans as merciless beasts, yet this officer treated her with restraint, almost as if he respected her. Her anger grew with her confusion. One moment she hated him for keeping her in chains. The next she found herself waiting for his visits. Not for the food, not for the water, but for the chance to hear his voice again, to catch even a single word that might reveal his true intentions. On the 10th day, she tested him. When he placed the tray down, she kicked it over, spilling food across the floor. Her silver eyes blazed as she hissed, "I am not your pet." The officer looked at her calmly, his face unmoved. He bent down, picked up the tray, and without a word, left the cell. The silence after his departure was heavier than iron. She thought he would return with punishment, but he did not. Instead, the next day, he brought the food again, clean and untouched, as if nothing had happened. This shook her more than any blow could have. Days turned into weeks, and still, the silent watcher came. She began to notice small details about him. The scar along his jaw, the way his hands were steady even under the weight of the tray, the way his eyes lingered for a fraction of a second longer each time they met hers. He was studying her just as she studied him, and slowly, a dangerous thought crept in her mind. Maybe he did not see her as an enemy at all. But how could that be? She was the daughter of their sworn foes, a soldier raised to kill humans. She remembered the screams of her comrades when humans charged into battle, the smell of burning metal, the sound of plasma, fire cutting through the air. Her people had told her that humans would never forgive, never forget, never stop until every alien was gone. And yet, here she was alive, being watched not with hatred, but with patience. One night, unable to bear the silence, she whispered into the darkness, "Why me? Why spare me?" The walls gave no answer, but in her heart, she knew the question was not for the walls. It was for him, the silent watcher, the human who had not killed her when he had the chance. The human who kept her alive for reasons she could not yet understand. And as she closed her eyes, she realized something terrifying. She was no longer afraid of death. She was afraid of the truth that was coming, the truth the officer carried in his silence, a truth that would change everything she believed. The silence between them could no longer last. She had spent too many days watching him, too many nights wondering why he spared her. Every time he entered, she wanted to demand answers, yet her pride kept her tongue still. But tonight, the weight of her thoughts pressed too heavy, and when the officer placed the tray down, she spoke. "Why do you keep me alive?" Her voice was sharp, but beneath it trembled fear. The officer paused, his hand resting on the tray for a moment longer. He did not turn, not at first, but then slowly he lifted his gaze. For the first time, their eyes met fully, brown against silver, human against alien. The air grew heavy, the hum of the ship's engines fading beneath the silence of the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "You are not our enemy." Her breath caught in her throat, her mind rejecting the words. Not their enemy? How could that be? Her people had always said humans would destroy every alien they caught. "You lie," she hissed, anger sparking her chest. "My people told me the truth about you. You kill, you conquer, you show no mercy." The officer's jaw tightened, but his eyes did not waver. "Your people lied," he said, the words like a knife cutting through everything she believed. She wanted to laugh, to spit, to deny, but the calm in his voice froze her. There was no mockery, no cruelty, only certainty. It was as if he carried a truth so deep that no denial could shake it. Still, she pushed back, her pride a shield. "Why would I believe you? I saw humans kill my squad. I saw fire rain from your weapons." The officer nodded once, slowly, as if her anger was expected. "We fought because your leaders attacked us first," he replied. "We defend, we do not destroy for pleasure." The words struck her harder than any blow. Could it be true? Could the war she had fought in, the hatred she had carried, all be built on lies? Her chest tightened, her thoughts clashing like swords. No, it could not be. Yet the longer she stared into his eyes, the more her certainty cracked. She wanted to scream at him, to call him a monster, but her voice broke. "You should have killed me," she whispered, her silver eyes burning with confusion. The officer stepped closer, just one step, but it made the space between them feel dangerously small. "If we were the monsters you believe," he said softly, "you would already be dead." Her heart raced, fear and anger colliding with something far more dangerous, doubt. The stories of her people replayed in her mind. Humans as butchers, humans as demons, humans as destroyers. Yet here stood one who offered food, water, and words that sounded more like mercy than cruelty. And he was not afraid of her, not even bound in chains. She could see it in the way he looked at her, steady, unshaken. She turned her face away, unable to hold his gaze. "You will say anything to break me," she muttered, though her voice was weak. But deep inside, she felt the ground of her beliefs shifting, cracks spreading in the foundation of her truth. The officer did not push further. He only placed the tray before her and stepped back. But as he reached the door, he paused, his voice drifting back to her like a shadow. "You will see it yourself," he said. "The truth cannot stay hidden forever." The door closed, leaving her in darkness once again. But the silence was no longer the same. It echoed with his words. She pressed her hands to her head, whispering to herself, trying to hold onto the hate she had been taught. "They are liars. They are killers. They are—" Her voice broke before the sentence could end. For the first time since her capture, tears burned her eyes. Not because of fear, but because deep down she had felt no lie in his voice. It terrified her more than death. The idea that humans were not what she had been told. The idea that everything she believed, everything she fought for, might collapse into dust. As the night dragged on, she lay awake, staring at the flickering light above. Her mind repeated his words again and again. You are not our enemy. If that was true, then who was the enemy? Her people? Her leaders? Or perhaps the lies she had carried all her life? And in the shadows of her cell, for the first time, she wondered if the real war was not between human and alien, but between truth and lies. Days passed, but her mind no longer found rest in silence. Every word the officer had spoken lingered in her thoughts, echoing louder than the hum of the ship's engines. You are not our enemy. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. Yet she could not forget the calm certainty in his voice. If humans were liars, why would he not simply torture her? Why would he not demand secret from her? Why would he keep feeding her with patience instead of cruelty? The seed of doubt grew with every visit, and doubt was more dangerous than chains. One evening, when he brought her food, she refused to take it. Instead, she stared straight into his eyes, her voice sharp but shaking. Tell me the truth. Why am I here? What do you want from me? The officer placed the tray down and for a long moment said nothing, his silence heavier than steel. Finally, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying her as if weighing her soul. You were told humans would destroy you, he said slowly, but it is your leaders who wanted this war. She blinked, her heart stumbling at the words. That is a lie, she spat back, though the strength in her voice cracked. Is it? He asked quietly. Do you know why your fleet attacked the colony at Vera? Do you know what the humans they were doing? She opened her mouth to answer, but stopped, her mind blank. She had been told humans invaded first. She had been told they slaughtered her kind without warning. But she had never asked why. She had never questioned. The officer's voice cut through her silence. They were building shelters. They were growing food. Nothing more, he said, and your leaders sent soldiers to wipe them out. Her throat tightened, anger and fear colliding inside her chest. No, my people would not, she started, but her own words rang hollow in her ears. Had she ever seen proof, or had she only accepted the stories told to her since childhood? The officer stepped closer, not with threat, but with conviction. Do you want to know why you are alive? He asked. Because we do not kill without reason. We fight when we must, but we do not destroy for pleasure. His words shook her more than any weapon could have. She wanted to deny them, to cling to the hatred that had been her armor, but cracks spread through that armor now. If he spoke the truth, then everything she believed, every life she had taken, every order she had followed, all of it rested on lies. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Why tell me this, she whispered. Why not let me die with my hate? The officer's gaze softened, though his voice remained steady. Because hate is a weapon your leaders forged to control you, he said. If you see the truth, you break their chain. She turned away, unable to face him, her heart racing with betrayal. Could it be true that the real enemy was not the humans before her, but the very people who had raised her? The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until the officer finally left, the door sealing behind him. But this time, she did not feel abandoned. She felt exposed, as if every lie of her past was crumbling under a light she could no longer avoid. Alone in her cell, she remembered the faces of her comrades, the pride in their eyes as they swore loyalty to their leaders. Had they died for truth or for lies? She remembered the speeches, the warnings, the promises that humans would come for them with fire and death. But the fire had come from her own side first, hadn't it? Her chest ached as she whispered into the darkness. Have I been fighting the wrong war all along? The next time the officer entered, she did not glare. She did not spit words of hate. Instead, her voice was quiet, almost broken. What do you want me to see? She asked. His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. The truth, he said simply, and when the time comes, you will see it for yourself. The The silence of the cell was broken not by the officer's usual steps, but by alarms that screamed through the corridors of the warship. The floor trembled beneath her feet, and the lights flickered red, bathing the walls in warning glow. She rose from the corner, her heart pounding, for she knew that sound. It was the sound of battle, the sound of ships clashing outside. Her people had come, they had found her, and they were bringing destruction with them. For a moment, hope flared inside her chest. They had not abandoned her. They would tear the humans apart and free her. But the thought quickly twisted into fear. If her people boarded the ship, would they see her as a prisoner or a traitor? Would they rescue her or silence her for being captured alive? The door to her cell hissed open, and the officer stood there, no tray in his hands this time, only a weapon slung at his side. His eyes met hers, steady as ever, though the alarms painted his face in harsh red light. "Come," he ordered, his voice sharper than before. She hesitated, confused. "Why? Where are you taking me?" He stepped forward, unlocking her restraints with a device on his wrist. The shackles fell from her hands, clattering to the floor. "Because if they find you here, they will kill you," he said, "and I will not let that happen." The words froze her. Her own people kill her. It was unthinkable, yet the way he said it, with such certainty, made her believe it. Before she could respond, the ship shook violently, throwing them both against the wall. The officer grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. "Move," he commanded, and together they ran into the chaos of the corridors. The ship was alive with panic, soldiers rushing, officers shouting, lights flashing. Through it all, the officer led her with sure steps, keeping himself between her and danger. Her mind whirled with questions, but there was no time to speak. Explosions rocked the halls, and smoke filled the air, the scent of burning metal sharp in her nose. Suddenly, a section of the wall blew apart, and enemy soldiers stormed in. Her people, their armor dark and familiar, their weapons raised. For an instant, her heart leapt. She almost called out to them. But before she could, their leader's voice rang out. "Kill the human, and kill her too. She is compromised." The words cut deeper than any blade. Her knees weakened, the hope she carried crumbling into ash. Her own kind saw her not as a warrior worth saving, but as a weakness to erase. Before her shock could become despair, plasma fire streaked through the air. The officer shoved her aside, taking the front line, his weapon blazing. She watched in disbelief as he fought, his movements sharp, efficient, fearless. He did not hesitate, did not flinch, and every shot he fired was to protect her. She could hear his breath, steady even under fire. For the first time, she realized he was risking his life not for orders, not for duty, but for her. Her people shouted, called her a traitor, cursed her name. Each word cut her deeper, but the sight before her cut deeper still. A human, the very enemy she had sworn to hate, was shielding her with his own body. It was the twist she never imagined, the fate she had never believed. Adrenaline surged through her veins, and she grabbed a fallen weapon. The officer glanced at her once, his eyes questioning, but when she raised the weapon against her own kind, he said nothing. He only nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her choice. Together, they fought back to back, human and alien, their fire cutting through the attackers until the corridor fell silent. Smoke drifted through the hall, bodies littered the floor, and her chest heaved with exhaustion. She looked at the officer, his face streaked with ash, his eyes still steady. In that moment, she understood. The death she had expected at human hands had never come. Instead, it was the human who had saved her from death at the hands of her own people. Her weapon trembled in her hands as the truth sank in. Everything she believed, every lesson drilled into her since childhood, shattered. The enemy she had feared was not the monster. The monsters were the ones who had sent her to die for their lies. She met his gaze, and though no words passed between them, the meaning was clear. A bond had been forged in fire and betrayal, and nothing would ever be the same again. The corridor still smoked from the battle, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the sound of plasma fire. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her silver eyes fixed on the officer. He stood tall despite the burns on his armor, his weapon still warm in his hands, his breath steady. He had fought for her, risked his life for her, while her own kind had called for her death. Something inside her shifted, like chains breaking one by one. The hate she had carried all her life felt hollow, and in its place rose something she could not name. Not trust, not yet, but a dangerous spark of understanding. More alarms screamed through the ship, reminding her that the fight was not over. The officer's voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. "We cannot stay here. More will come." She nodded without argument, surprising herself. For once she did not resist him. Together, they moved through the corridors, stepping over debris and fallen soldiers, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and burning metal. When enemy fire cracked ahead, she no longer hesitated. She raised the stolen weapon and fired alongside him, her aim steady, her instincts sharper than ever. Every shot she took against her own people felt like cutting into old scars, painful but freeing. With each blast, she realized the war was no longer as simple as her leaders had made it. It was not aliens against humans. It was lies against truth, control against freedom. At one turn, they were pinned down by heavy fire. The officer leaned against the wall, his weapon pressed to his chest, his eyes scanning for an opening. She looked at him, her voice trembling but firm. "You saved me, why?" He glanced at her, his expression calm, even under fire. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "No one deserves to die for the lies of their leaders." The words struck her deeper than the blasts echoing through the corridor. Simple, honest, unshaken. It was the kind of truth her world had never given her. She found herself nodding, not because she fully believed yet, but because her heart wanted to. They broke through the enemy line together, moving as if they had trained side by side for years. She covered his back, he covered hers, every step a bond forged in survival. When a blast nearly struck him, she pushed him aside without thinking, firing back with precision. The officer gave her a brief look, and in that glance was something unspoken, respect. By the time they reached the inner hangar, the battle had shifted. Humans held the ground, their ships preparing to repel the last of the attackers. The officer led her to cover, where soldiers stared at her with suspicion, weapons ready. She felt the weight of their eyes, the same mistrust she had once carried for them. Her chest tightened, but before the moment could turn violent, the officer raised his hand. "She is with me," he said firmly, his voice leaving no room for doubt. The soldiers lowered their weapons slowly, though their gazes remained sharp. She stood tall, her chin raised, even as unease twisted inside her. For the first time, she was not standing among her own people. For the first time, she was standing with humans. The thought should have filled her with shame, but instead it filled her with something else, freedom. Here, she was not a pawn in the lies of her leaders. She was not an enemy waiting for execution. Here, she was a fighter who had chosen her side with her own will. As the battle outside raged on, she looked at the officer. Her voice was quiet but steady. "If I fight with you, they will call me traitor forever." His reply was calm, without hesitation. "Then fight not for them. Fight for the truth." Her heart pounded as the words sank deep. For the first time in her life, she felt the choice was hers. And when the next wave of attackers stormed the hangar, she lifted her weapon and stood shoulder to shoulder with the human officer. Together, they fought, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as allies bound by survival and something greater, trust. Each blast of her weapon cut away another chain of lies. Each step forward built a bridge she never thought possible. And in the fire of that battle, a new alliance was born. One that no leader, no war, and no lie could ever erase. The hangar shook with the thunder of battle, the last of the alien raiders forcing their way in, their weapons blazing. The humans held their line, soldiers shouting orders, ships firing outside, but the enemy kept pressing forward. She stood at the officer's side, her weapon hot in her hands, her silver eyes narrowed with fire. Every shot she took struck against her own people, every blast a wound to the loyalty she once carried. But the more she fought, the more she knew her loyalty had been chained to lies, and now those chains were gone. The battle stretched on, fierce and unrelenting, until finally the last of the raiders fell, their bodies scattered across the smoking floor. Silence spread slowly, broken only by the heavy breathing of soldiers and the crackle of flames. She lowered her weapon, her hands trembling, not from fear but from the weight of what had just happened. She had fought for humans, against her own, and she had survived. But survival was no longer enough. Now she needed the truth. The officer approached her, his armor scarred, his face streaked with soot, but his eyes steady as always. "You see now," he said quietly. "They would have killed you without hesitation, because you were never more than a tool to them." Her chest tightened, his words piercing through the haze of battle. She thought of the faces of her comrades, of the speeches from her leaders, of the hatred drilled into her bones. All of it shattered in that moment, leaving her standing in the ruins of belief. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why save me when I was sworn to kill you?" The officer's gaze did not waver, his reply firm yet calm. "Because you're more than what they told you to be," he said. "Because you deserved a choice, and because we are not the monsters they made us out to be." The words cut deep, filling her with both pain and hope. She realized then the true twist of fate. She had expected death at human hands, expected cruelty, expected an end. But instead, she had found mercy, she had found truth, and she had found someone who saw her not as an enemy, but as a person. Around them, the human soldiers watched in silence, their mistrust still present, but tempered by the sight of her fighting beside them. She felt their eyes on her, weighing her, judging her, yet she stood tall. She was no longer just a captive, no longer just a soldier of lies. She was something else now, something new. The officer placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and grounding. "You can choose what comes next," he said. "You can stay with us, or you can return to your people, but you must know the truth before you decide." Her throat tightened, for she already knew what her people would do. They would call her traitor, they would hunt her, they would erase her name from history. But here, with these humans, with this officer, she had a chance to be free. She lifted her chin, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "Then I choose," she said. "I choose not to die for their lies. I choose to live for the truth." The officer nodded once, and in his eyes she saw something more than respect, something she could not yet name, but felt deep in her chest. It was trust, it was bond, it was the spark of something that could grow beyond war. As the hangar doors closed and the alarms faded, she looked out at the stars beyond the viewport. Her life had been built on the expectation of death, but fate had given her something else. Not just survival, not just freedom, but the beginning of a future she had never imagined. She whispered softly to herself, a vow carried into the silence. "I expected death at human hands, but instead I found life." And so the war was no longer just a war between species. It was a war between lies and truth, fear and hope, despair and mercy. And for the first time, she knew which side she truly belonged to.